Hey everybody, welcome to this week's live chat. Think about this crazy 2 chats in 1 week. I'm kind of enjoying it. I hope you are too. Thanks for joining me for our regularly scheduled Thursday live chat. In this chat, I'm going to talk a little bit about my favorite machine quilting notions and then answer your questions. I've been text chatting before the video started and got some good questions that we'll definitely address. So looking forward to another great session today. So first of all, a little update about the challenge. Thank you for everybody that has left such nice comments about the challenge, excited about learning some new designs, including wood grain and pebbles and some really fun textures to add to your quilts. And if you order the panel or any of the coordinating exclusive products, they are shipping. We are waiting on some coordinating prints, which just came today, so we are cutting and packaging and shipping out just as fast as we can. So you should start to see those notifications come through if you haven't already. So I'm kind of excited. This challenge launch has gone smoother than any other one, and I think it's because my crew is so amazing, and it's just been really nice to not be freaking out so much behind the scenes. Anyway, so that's just that. Also, the weekly giveaway winner is Sharon Overstreet. I've already emailed her. So Sharon, you won the Flora and Foliage panel. And so congratulations. Now remember, I have weekly giveaways. All you have to do to enter is click the description box and there's a link in there. You can just add your name and I pick a winner every week. Except I'm not picking one next week. I'm gonna have a 2-week prize. So this giveaway is good for 2 weeks. Now, why would I do it like that? Because it's a pretty good giveaway, if I do say so myself. One lucky viewer is going to win my quilted Flora and Foliage panel quilt. So the one I use for the challenge, one lucky quilter is going to get that. If you want it, you can enter the giveaway, and I'll announce that the day after the challenge launches on my live chat on April 8th. So really excited about it, although I will tell you it probably won't be bound. I mean, maybe might get around, I won't get around to it. So hopefully you're okay with winning a unbound quilted sample, but I think it's pretty, so hopefully it will go to a very happy home. So don't forget to enter the giveaway. You have 2 weeks to enter that, and it's going to kick off our challenge on the right foot. So very, very excited about that. All right, so let's talk about free motion quilting supplies and notions, right? So we know quilters, we love our notions. We just know that, right? Like, we're always looking for the newest, funnest notion, and I like seeing what other people use and kind of poking through their quilting rooms when I can get out of my house. So I'm excited to share with you what I like to use, but I just want to give it this I want to preface it by just saying that this is just what works for me. This is just my preferences, and so you might feel differently, and that's totally fine. There's such great things out on the market that you might have already stumbled across something that's really great. What's funny is I realize that as a quilter, I'm kind of like a old dog, new tricks kind of thing. Some of the supplies I'll talk about, I'll say, well, I've always used them, so that's why I've just always used them. So I kind of felt like once I found something that worked for me, I didn't really need to venture out from beyond that. But I'm also going to talk about my favorite machine quilting supplies for a sewing machine and a long arm, because there are some differences there. And since the challenge, I'll be demonstrating on both types of machines, I might as well show you what it is I like to work with. So we'll start with the sewing machine. Now, when it comes to quilting on your sewing machine, free motion machine quilting, the most important thing to have is just that sense of adventure. Now, I know that sounds silly, but Chris had asked on the chat before, how do you get over your fear of free motion quilting? And my answer was you just have to kind of go for it. But you also have to let go of some of those perfectionist tendencies. So hopefully, if you're brand new, these are some things that might make it a little bit more comfortable for you. But as you practice and as you actually learn and expand your skills, you're going to find really quickly what it is you like and that you don't like. So let's talk about the obvious. I love to have my piecing potion or my quilting juice. Now, I know this isn't a supply or a notion, but it's really important because I like to relax when I start to quilt. So just because I like a glass of wine, though, that might not be your thing. Anytime you can distract yourself. So an audiobook or a music, headphones, I love listening to my headphones when I'm quilting. Something to kind of keep that analytical part of your mind occupied, and then the quilting can just come out. So definitely gotta have something to help you relax. And then of course we need some chocolate. So I like my little snacks. Sometimes it's popcorn if I'm being good. Sometimes it's chocolate if I'm not. But definitely make yourself comfortable. Have all your stuff that you need. But the rest of it I've kind of put together in this little basket just because, you know, I like to put it together like that. All right, the first thing that I find very helpful is a Supreme slider. Now, I will say I have put together a downloadable supply list for the challenge, and the link for that is in the description box below. It tells you exactly what you will need and what you might need. But for those of you that have been in on my live chats before, you know that I started quilting on a long arm, and then I went to quilting on a sewing machine. So once I learned how to quilt moving the machine, it was a little bit backwards trying to go back to the sewing machine, and I realized I really struggled with the drag of the quilt. So Supreme sliders, I love it, and that's what I use. So it just gives the quilt a slicker surface to quilt on, and it has a static kind of backing that will stick to your quilt, your machine. Now, you have to be careful because if it gets fuzzy on it, it can move around, and any of you that have actually sewed your Supreme slider, to your quilt will know what I'm talking about. But all you have to do is give it a quick rinse and let it dry, and then it's right back to where it needs to be. So this is gonna help kind of cut down on that, that friction when you're trying to move the quilt. Because if you've already tried quilting on your sewing machine, you know what I'm talking about, right? You've got all that quilt you're wrestling through. This is going to help make it a little easier. There are other options, other brands and other types that people will use. I know that some people will suggest Teflon cookie sheets or anything to smooth out that movement. Also, I know some people have used silicone spray. So there's some different options, and if you like a particular thing to help it move clearly or easily, you can definitely leave that in the comments below. But the Supreme slider comes in a couple different sizes, the smaller and then the bigger one. It depends on the size of your machine. So I have the bigger one because I have the extension table, but I also have a smaller one for when I'm not using my extension table. Another thing about it is it covers up your feed dogs. So here's a question, you can kind of see it here. The thing about the Supreme slider is it has that little hole right there, and it covers your feed dogs up. So sometimes people will ask me, do I lower my feed dogs even when I have them covered? And honestly, most of the time I don't. I just leave them up, but cover them with this, and it doesn't cause any trouble. Whatever you do though, do it the whole time. Don't, leave your feed dogs down part of the time and then up. Either way. So love the Supreme slider, definitely helps kind of cut down on that friction for me. All right, next things I love, thread. Now these, we know how much I love thread, and I've talked about this before, and I have a whole live chat about threads where I geeked out on all the different kinds of things. But when you start to machine quilt, the most important thing is that you have a good quality machine quilting thread. That's the most important thing. Well, I guess besides a sewing machine and a free motion quilting foot. It's hard enough to learn how to free motion quilt when you are everything's going fine, but when your thread keeps breaking or shredding, it's super frustrating. So any kind of good quality thread is gonna work. And I have quite the selection. I have cones and spools, and I have them kind of divided up between my two machines. It doesn't matter if you like cotton or you like the sparkly, whatever it is, just make sure it's meant for machine quilting. Another thing that's super important that I just go on and on about is the needles. So when you're quilting, you're moving your fabric through this machine at a high rate of speed, and you're hoping that the thread doesn't break and shred. And the second part of that beautiful stitch is the needle. Now, I like titanium coated top stitch needles, and I know those of you that have been here a couple times already have heard me say that, but they're just strong enough to stand up to the machine quilting. Here's what happens with newer quilters, and I've taught a lot of classes, so I've seen this. It's completely normal. As you're quilting, you're moving a little timidly, really slow, and so your machine isn't going quite as fast. Well, if you're pushing too hard, you can bend or deflect that needle, and that's going to not give you great stitches. So definitely get some needles in the size that you use with your thread. So it depends on the thread for the size needles that you'll use. So that's definitely right there. Second of all, this is a newer thing I kind of love. They're quilt clips. Now, they're like $6, but they're amazing because they kind of keep the quilt all rolled up and together. So it's made by the Cottage Mills, or little thing right here, but the clips take the quilt sandwich and I can roll it up and clip it so that it's not hanging down. So what tends to happen is when we're machine quilting, gravity is not our friend, right? We don't want to fight any of that gravity. And so we want the whole quilt to be up and even with the bottom of our sewing machine. That's not always possible, right? If I don't have a big enough table, or I don't have quite the right extension or table extension, then it's gonna hang down a little bit, but I wanna keep it together instead of letting it hang over the edge. Trust me on this. I'm sure if you quilted a little bit, you know what I'm talking about. But those little clips help keep it together and kind of keep it up and out of the way. And for any of these products, there's a link in the description box that you can go to my website and check it out if you'd like. All right, next is gloves. All right, so people are split on this, and in the classes I teach and the lectures I do before COVID, I felt that it was about half and half. So about 50% of people like the gloves and 50% of people don't really. I needed the gloves when I started out because I was so new at this idea of moving the fabric that I wanted all the help I could get to grab onto that quilt. And so when I started out with machine girds, because they have really grippy fingers, they were great. And then now these don't have quite as much grip, but they still help me grab it, and they're a little bit more lightweight and more comfortable. So it depends on your preferences there. I know some people like to use gardening gloves, or some people will use just the tips to help grab it. Whatever you can do to help get a hold of that. When it comes to this idea of gloves or clamps, there's plenty of products on the market, and you can find what works for you, but I definitely like the gloves, especially these, because I can pop them off my hand but leave them around my wrist if I need to get on my phone or something. So those are the most important things, especially the gloves and Supreme slider, needles and thread. Like that is the, I don't know, the core accessories that I use all the time on my sewing machine. But there are some other things that I use a lot too. So first of all, marking utensils. I have my favorite marking utensils, and I won't go into too much detail about this because I did a whole live chat on different marking tools, but I do love any kind of marking tool that comes off easily because I don't want to have to spend time removing it. So the water-soluble marker, I love that. I love the pounce pads, but I also love this Ultimate Marking Pencil, and it's the same company that does the pounce pads. It's just a solid form of that chalk. So really nice to make those little registration marks. Now, one question was asked during the chat before we started, you know, what rulers or what things are we going to need to get started with this challenge? And that's why I put together the supply list. I will say that there's not going to be any rulers, but you might find it helpful to mark some registration lines when you're quilting some of these designs that go over a big area. So whether it's a chalk pencil, a dry erase marker, a water-soluble marker, something like that will definitely be helpful. But here's the thing about me, you have to know, I am really scatterbrained and constantly am losing stuff, so I have several marking tools in different spots. So I make sure I kind of have them spread around so I can always find one. Because it always seems to work out that when I need to mark something, I can't find the pen I need. All right, again, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but I do love my stencils. Those help me mark out my registration lines. I did a whole live chat about this, of course, but I just like to have the registration lines because then I can create the design in there. But if you wanted to mark out the whole design, you could definitely do that as well. But I just find that I've had these since I started machine quilting. So helpful. Love them. Anyway, those are the Designs with Lines stencils. There's 3 of them I particularly love, that basic 8 that we saw, the 2-inch lines, and then also the 9 patch. And again, it just kind of helps me break up that negative space into smaller sections. All right, of course I have rulers. We won't go into that, but I've got all sorts of rulers. But sometimes the question comes up, what's the best ruler to start with if you've never machine quilted with a ruler? Well, I would say a good straight edge. Something with a straight edge is going to be a great place to start. Then if you decide you like it, I have released a whole challenge on rulers, and you can check that out. So I have I have a lot of rulers. It's almost embarrassing. I won't even show you. I have them spread out too. Like there's some in my filming area here. There's some at home. They're just stashed around, but I love, love, love my rulers. So that's pretty much what I work with on my sewing machine. And so I'm going to stop real quick, and a question that came up during the chat before was really good, and it was talking about free motion quilting feet. It was Ann Miller. She said, what's the best foot for free motion quilting on your sewing machine? Well, the best answer for that is it depends on what you're trying to do with your foot. So I brought some of my feet, and we're just going to kind of talk through what I'm going to use for what. And the most important thing is that you have a free motion foot. Doesn't matter which one you use, but there are some advantages and disadvantages to particular feet. So what I'm going to do real quick, I'm going to move my basket out of the way, and we're going to do a little show and tell. So I'm going to kind of hold this up so you can see it. Now, it depends on what your company or your sewing machine manufacturer makes, but there's some different feet out there. So for instance, there's this foot. This is an open toe foot. This might be handy if you're doing some very fine quilting, very close quilting, and you want to be able to see where you're quilting. I don't use this one ever because I don't do a lot of micro quilting, so I don't really need that. The one downside of this kind of foot is that it's oval. It's not perfectly round. And what that means is I won't have the same spacing between the needle and the front of the foot as I would have between the needle and the edge of the foot. This really comes to play when you're echoing. So I like to use the edge of my foot as a guide as I'm echoing around. So I'm not going to really find that very helpful because I'll have some echo lines that are closer and some that are farther apart. However, again, if you want to be able to see right where you're at doing that really tiny quilting, then you'll definitely find this helpful for you. Another thing I want to point out is that some feet, and it depends, again, I can't speak to every sewing machine manufacturer out there, but this one has a little spring right here, it's hard to see, that I can raise and lower the foot. So I can raise and lower it I can raise and lower it depending on how thick my quilt sandwich is. If you have an adjustable foot, this is great, right? You can adjust it to just the perfect height. But if you adjust it too high, you'll get skip stitches. And if you adjust it too low, it'll be hard to push the quilt through. So don't be afraid to adjust it. I say go as high as you can until you start skipping stitches and then back it down just a bit. So that is that particular foot. The one I use almost 99% of the time would be my ruler foot. So this is the same kind of bracket shape, same adjustment, but I have this little attachment down here, and that ruler foot gives me a taller profile so that I don't run my ruler over my foot and break my machine. I just leave this on all the time. So even when I'm not quilting rulers, I'll still have that on there. The reason is I'm usually bouncing back and forth between ruler work and free motion quilting, and I don't want to have to take the time to take it off. The one drawback with this though is that if you're quilting on it, it can be hard to see where you're right at the needle because it's a little bit higher. However, I usually tell quilters, don't look right at the needle, look beyond the needle in the direction you're heading, so that's not really a problem for me. Very, very common thing with ruler feet is some quilters will put their ruler foot on and it will be a different height than their other foot, and they'll get skip stitches. So if that happens, remember, you can lower and raise your foot if it has this adjustment or your machine has a adjustment on it as well. All right, lastly, the one that you might not recognize or use as much, this one looks kind of different, right? It looks more like a darning foot or a clear foot. I like that it's clear so you can see. It's more of a dynamic foot. So this little arm right here gives it a little hopping motion. And this is very helpful if I'm working with thicker seams. So if I was to do a t-shirt quilt or something with very thick seams, I want that hopping motion to help me kind of hop over those seams, help me kind of move it through there. So I would use this if I was using a quilt with bigger, thicker seams or something I needed a little help moving it through. So there's other feet out there as well. These are just the ones that I happened to grab after the question came up. The main idea is just play with all of them and find which one you like the best. You know, how do you know which one you like? Well, just start working with it and you'll figure it out. It's kind of like, how do you know if you like Brussels sprouts? Well, you just eat them and you know if you like them or not. So free motion foot, that's up to you. All right, so that's kind of my basics for machine quilting on a sewing machine. Of course, there's other things I like to play with, but if you're thinking about kind of getting started and you're like, I don't know, this is a good idea to kind of give you a little bit of a place to start. If you're not sure if you like it, this is where Quilting Friends come in so handy because most Quilting Friends will let you borrow their stuff to see if they like it. So hopefully that helps. Now on the challenge or during the challenge, I'm going to be demonstrating the designs on a sewing machine and a long arm. Mostly because there are a few tweaks or a few things you'll approach differently depending on the machine. So there are some other supplies I use on my long arm that I wouldn't on my sewing machine. And the first is a ruler base. So this actually came up during the chat. We were talking about ruler bases, and this is my ruler base. It still has the paper on it. I could peel that off. So the ruler base gives the machine a little bit more sturdy area so that I can use my rulers on it without having it wobble. The question that I get asked about this a lot is, well, first of all, where do you get a ruler base? Well, it depends on your manufacturer. So this is the ruler base for the Handy Quilter Amara. I just leave it on all the time. So that's the second question is how, do you take it off or leave it on? I just put it on and I leave it on. That way I can switch out between my rulers and my free motion without having to deal with the hassle of putting this back on. Now some quilters will say though that you'll get a little drag from it. I haven't noticed that. I haven't had an issue with that. And for smaller machines, you might lose a couple of inches, like a little bit of throat space. It might hit the bar before, but it's definitely worth it. So if you've ever wanted to quilt with rulers, or you're thinking about it, just get the ruler base. It's definitely a wise investment. I like to joke, there's only one rule in machine quilting, use a ruler base on your long arm. All right, so besides the thread and the needles and all that stuff that I use, I also really like these clamps. So a question came up and it was like you all were reading my mind. I loved it. So a question came up about red snappers. Now, for those of you that don't have a long arm, this stuff might not make sense, but those of you that do, hopefully it does. I like to pin my backs to the leaders. So how I attach my quilt is I use pins, big old corsage pins. And the reason I do that is because I've always done it. And I can do it pretty fast. I'm pretty good at it. Although I do poke myself from time to time and it does not feel well. But some people like to use what are called red snappers or other magnets or other things to attach their quilt. Totally fine. It doesn't matter as long as that back is secure. But since I float my quilt tops, I like to have a clamp on the front. So as my quilt top is draped down, I have my little clamp to help hold the quilt in place. So again, these are specific to your machine. This is for the Handy Quilter studio frame, but I like that it easily helps me hold it in place. Okay, so why am I showing this to you? So a question came up, and it was a great question. It was from Robin, and Robin said, I'm working on a long arm. Should I watch the whole challenge first and then load my sandwich and try, or how should I approach this? And this has been the one thing that I've had trouble reconciling. I can't figure out how to make this better for you long armers. I totally understand the pain. I wouldn't want to put a quilt on my machine and have it, taken, be full for 6 weeks. So if you want to leave your machine empty and quilt other stuff, watch the challenge, and then do it all at once, totally fine. But you also have the option of switching your quilts on and off. So I like to use the clamps to quickly load. So if my whole sandwich, if my whole quilt is basted, like I've quilted some of it on my long arm, I put stitches in there to help stabilize, I can take it off and then just clamp it on really easily. So that could be an option for you. Or you can load a really big piece of fabric and have your panel off to one side and then the other side over here for practice. So it depends on how you approach this with your long arms. It's completely up to you. I wish I had a better way to make this a little bit easier for you, but it is what it is. This challenge though, I kind of alternate, so not always, but I try to alternate between starting in the center and starting on the outside. And so this challenge, we'll start at the top and kind of work our way down. So hopefully that will be a little bit of a little bonus for you. So on the long arm, those are the two main differences to what I use on the sewing machine. Of course, I'm still using that quality thread. I'm still using the needles that work with it. And then I, of course, have my headphones, and I love to listen to my music. Another question that came up, so now I'm going to kind of chat about some of the questions. So what I love about the live chats is I can see what you want to know and I can address them. And I think it just makes my challenges that much better. So thank you for asking questions. Someone asked if I like to use the stitch regulator or manual when quilting. And so the stitch regulator just means that I can move the machine or the fabric as fast as I want, and the machine will speed up and slow down with me to give me nice, perfect, even stitches. However, I like to use manual, where I set it on one speed and then just quilt. Now, this is because first, I learned without a stitch regulator. When I first started quilting, they weren't really as common as they are now. And second, I love the momentum of quilting in manual. So for me, it's going to sound weird, but don't think I'm weird, okay? For me, it's about the experience. So if I'm quilting on my sewing machine, it's purring along at its speed. I'm moving with that momentum. I just feel like I get better, more fluid lines. That's just how I like to quilt. However, if you are worried about being able to take your time and stop and speed up, then a stitch regulator is a great option. So you definitely have to kind of find your happy spot with it. Where we will really see this come to play will be for the first week of the challenge, where we start learning wood grain, and we're going to go right into those long wavy lines. And I bet you'll notice pretty quick that my stitches tend to get longer with those kind of designs. When I'm working with pebbles, they tend to get shorter because I'm in manual, so my stitches are not the same length. But I like to call it organic stitch length, where the different size stitch lengths really add a different texture to the quilt. Okay, I'm just joking, of course, but definitely play with that and find where you're happy with it. And if you're on a sewing machine and your machine doesn't have a stitch regulator, well, then you have the choice made for you. You don't have to worry about it. Try not to worry about stitch length. I like to say that's kind of like worrying about what your handwriting is going to look like when you're still learning your letters. That will work itself out with practice. And that's just so happens to be why we're doing the free motion challenge, right? We're going to have 6 weeks of practice, so it's going to be great. All right, another question that came up, and this was a good one, and I didn't address this last week or on Monday, and I wish I had thought to do it. The question was, in which order should you do the challenges? So we know the Free Motion Challenge is a video series. We're working through a specific design, but sometimes we think, oh, should I start with the first one, or where should I start at? You don't have to do them in any order. You pick one and you start. That's what's great about machine quilting. If you want to learn a design, that's the one you practice. Different people find different designs easy, and different people find different designs difficult. It's kind of interesting. In a class, a good portion of people will do really great with swirls, but not with ribbon candy. Or some others will do great geometric, but not the meander. So just find one and practice it. So you don't have to do them in a particular order. I don't think any particular design is more difficult than the other. I don't think there's like a basic design and a harder design. Now, there are designs that take more steps to come together, but they're not difficult. They're just kind of like letters of the alphabet. We're just working with these different shapes. So definitely jump in. If you're nervous, this is your first time, you are in the right place because we're going to have fun. It's going to be encouraging, and it's just more about the process. So great question. Another one that came through was, if I'm only going to use one thread color for the panel, which one should I use? And it made me realize I should probably do a whole live chat on picking thread colors, because that is one of my favorite things to do. Because I get to play with thread, and I love my threads. So if you have seen the panel, there's grays and blues, and there's bright, beautiful raspberries and pinks. But if you're going to use one thread color of the whole thing, which is totally fine, I think it will look great, I would go with a neutral thread color in the value of the quilt. So the quilt is pretty much medium. There's some darkers and there's some light, but it's pretty much kind of there in the middle. So I would go with a gray or a tan, or maybe even, if you want to get crazy, like a yellow, just some kind of neutral in a medium colorway. So a medium gray. If you're not sure, if you're like, I'm on the fence, go lighter. I'd rather have lighter fabric, lighter thread on darker fabric. So that would be the color I would suggest. Of course, you get to do what you like to do. All right. Again, the question, I'll just reiterate this: how do I get over my fear of starting free motion quilting? You just have to do it. Now, here's what I don't understand, and maybe you all can help me understand this. There's something about free motion quilting that freaks people out in my classes, or when I used to teach. And it would be like, I don't know, I think it's like learning something new when you already feel comfortable with piecing and you don't want to go back to being new again. I don't know if it's because it's so subjective and you're comparing yourself to the people, on either side of you, thinking it looks better. It's not something to be scared of. It's just a different process to the machine, to quilting. Now, you might not like it. You might try it and you might think, this isn't for me. It's totally fine, right? I don't like binding. I know I don't like binding, and there probably isn't a challenge out there that would make me like binding. But if you do want to practice quilting and you do want to finish your own quilts, I promise you it's not scary, it's not difficult. You do have to get over the fear of perfectionism, and you have to remind yourself that a finished quilt is better than a perfect quilt top, 100%. I know sometimes people will say, well, I'm going to ruin my beautiful quilt. I've spent so much time on this, I don't want to ruin it. Well, go ahead and quilt it, because when it's finished, even if you don't love the quilting, it just becomes the quilt. It must happen when we wash the quilt, right? The quilt goes into the washing machine as the fabric and the pattern and the thread, and it comes out the quilt. I have plenty of vintage Angela quilting around my house, and I'm just glad that they're finished because they've been used and loved. So try not to be too hard on yourself. It's going to be a fun time. Got to let go of those perfectionistic tendencies. All right, so speaking of getting over your fear of machine quilting, next week's live chat is going to be practical tips on how to improve your machine quilting. And I'm not going to say stuff like practice or draw, although that is very important. I'm going to talk about posture and height and quilting within your control zone and how to focus on being smooth than perfect. So I hope you'll join me next week to learn more about that. Now, hopefully these 2 weeks together will kind of get you ready to start the challenge and not be scared, okay? So what I'm going to do is going to kind of hop on over to the chat, see if anybody has any questions. Pamela says she likes to do pebbles in manual mode, definitely. So another thing I didn't say about stitch regulator, I feel like I'm pushing the machine, like I have to nudge it to go, and I like the manual movement better. And so that's just how I like it. Yep, Linda says I'm my own worst critic, definitely. In my classes, I would tell people that they can't talk to themselves in a way that I wouldn't let anybody else talk to them. And I always joke that when I come around and tell them they're doing a good job, they can only say one thing: thank you. Because I would walk around in the class and I'd be like, that looks great. And they're like, oh, it doesn't look good. I didn't do great. No, just say thank you. So it's going to be fun. You're doing your best quilting now. You should totally be proud of it. Donna says, I think you're weird. Yes, but then I love the experience of free motion domestic. I love the experience of free motion quilting on a domestic versus a long arm. I could do either, but love the process. I think that's what's fun about it, right? Everybody has their different preferences. We all like the different fabrics and different thread colors. You got to definitely find what it is that you like. Okay, so if you have any questions about the supplies, you can leave them in the comments below. I definitely want to make sure I can help you if you have any questions with that. But remember, it's just a suggestion. That's just what works for me. And I would love to get on there and answer any questions you have. So if you have other questions, you can definitely join the video before we go live, about 30 minutes before I hop on there and answer questions. I'll be back next Thursday, so it's going to be a good time. And also, if you like this video or any of the live chats or any of that content I put out there, I hope you'll give it a thumbs up and subscribe so that you get first notification about the videos as they come out. Because once the challenge starts, we're going to have a lot of fun really diving into some different stuff. It's going to be great. All right, so I am going to wrap up now because I've got a lot of fabric to cut and a lot of orders to ship and some videos to put together. So thank you so much for joining me for this live chat. I can't wait to see you again on Thursday, where we'll talk about how to improve your free motion quilting. Until then, happy quilting.